I'm sorry. Everyone missed your beautiful intro. Thank you so much. So good afternoon. My name is Dr. Mila Marshall. I am an urban ecologist, and I deeply appreciate your time, whether you're watching this after or you're here now. I think this is a really important conversation. It does intersect between the industry, the environment, and the economy in some unique ways. And so I've really enjoyed amplifying the message of resource efficiency, environmental equity, as well as clean jobs using cannabis. So thank you. I do just want to kind of start off with some level setting. So with input from the environmental community in 2019, Illinois became a national leader in environmentally responsible cannabis regulation. Proponents argue that ending the war on drugs and implementing a proper tax structure could basically fund vital programs like education and substance abuse programs. However, there were deep concerns about the industry's environmental impact, which prompted proactive measures from the environmental community here in Illinois. I'm really proud that I was a part of that, and it's extended into this conversation. This is the second time that a conversation on cannabis and sustainability has been initiated here in Illinois, and I'm very proud that we're a Great Lakes leader in that regard. Indoor cultivation, basically mandated for security reasons, consumed a lot more energy, like up to 66 times that of an average household. Water with cannabis requires over 4 times the amount of water that wheat uses to be harvested, and 11 times that of corn. Waste management was also critical, especially extraction processes that could produce toxic emissions, and increasing the amount of non-recyclable single-use plastics that had to go into the landfill. So recognizing these challenges, the Illinois Environmental Council, along with other partners like the University of Chicago, Abrams Environmental Law Clinic, Delta Institute, as well as other members of the environmental community, helped craft legislation for standards or standardizing energy efficiency, water conservation, waste reduction, which many were incorporated into the bill. Our Illinois law mandates that permit applicants detail environmental practices, including recycling plans, water management, and energy efficient technology with compliance becoming a legal requirement. Additionally, mandatory data reporting on energy use aim to identify high consumption cultivators and growers to promote reductions. I'm really proud that we're on the pathway to getting growers operational, as well as supporting them to be energy efficient. It's exciting that Illinois is a leader within sustainable cannabis, and I think it pairs really nicely with the Climate and Equitable Jobs Act. Oftentimes when I speak about CEJA related to cannabis, it can go over people's heads. But it's significant to the cannabis industry in Illinois because it plays a key role in promoting equitable economic development and supporting communities impacted by energy and economic transitions. And so while CEJA primarily focuses on energy and environmental initiatives, its emphasis on equitable job creation and community supports aligns with the broader goals of promoting fairness and inclusion within the cannabis industry. So in my opinion, CEJA's provisions can support cannabis through supporting economic inclusion, facilitating sustainable business practice, encouraging community investment. And overall, we do want workforce development and sustainable energy, and CEJA pairs very nicely with the sustainability priorities of the emerging cannabis industry. I often talk about the lack of capital that cannabis has access to, which Asia spoke a little bit earlier about the BIPOC Banking and Cannabis Summit that will be this fall. And we really want to, help industry professionals understand the capital and resources that are available at the state level. And so whether that is electrification of parking lots and using subsidies to use solar panels for your grow, that there are resources generated by the state that all state legal industries have access to. And so I have some resources. Asia, if you can drop those links into the chat box for me. If you would like to learn more about Illinois having the greenest legislation and what that means from Illinois Environmental Council, I strongly suggest doing a little bit of poking around within the CEJA website. You can join their listserv. There are a number of workforce development programs and possible resources that your company can use. And so that's kind of like my high level, why are we here? We want equity in the industry, but because cannabis is an agricultural commodity, we know that agriculture requires resources, and that can come in conflict with environmental health and wellness, as we see in central and downstate Illinois, algal blooms and nutrient pollution. Indoor cannabis is a little different. However, still resource intensive and extremely expensive to operate. And so with that, if you have any questions, please feel free to drop them in the chat box. We'll be getting to them as I have, as I invite our speakers to join us. And again, thank you so much for taking time for this very important conversation. And with that, we have a very special guest. I'm very happy to have David Lakeman and Tess Fagan from Illinois Department of Agriculture. David Lakeman is currently the head of cannabis division at the Illinois Department of Ag, or IDOA, as you may hear me call them, a position he's held since September 2020. He's familiar with cannabis policy in Massachusetts and the commission itself, having served as head of government affairs at the Cannabis Control Commission between 2018 and 2020. He has also brought along with him Tess Fagans, the general counsel of the IDOA, with 9 years of experience, has been heavily involved in implementing the state's adult use cannabis program since 2020, focusing on social equity and safe industry regulation. Prior to this, she served as assistant state's attorney in Sangamon County for 3 years, handling various criminal and administrative cases. And she's a lifelong Springfield resident who enjoys gardening, reading, and family time. So welcome, Tess and David. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having us.
Oh, we got you both on screen. Great. So I'm headed to Springfield in a couple of weeks. So really happy to get
there.
I know I shared your biographies. Tess, can you kick us off and share a little bit about your role and responsibilities at IDOA relative to cannabis?
Yeah, as the general counsel, I provide guidance to the entire agency and the director and executive office specifically. And so on a day-to-day level, David and his team are handling cannabis interactions and things like that, regular regulatory run-of-the-mill things. But because this is still a new industry and, it's really hard when you write the law to know what things are going to come next. There's a lot that comes up where we're like, oh, this is a brand new issue of first impression. And so that will be the kind of thing that David would come talk to me and the executive office about. And we'd say, okay, what similar programs do we have where we've handled something similarly? What else do we have going on here? What makes sense for us in terms of our ability and our regulatory authority to move forward with? And then I am currently the point contact with the Attorney General's office related to a variety of cannabis litigation. But it's truly always something new with cannabis. I was telling David earlier this morning, I looked through my email just now to find this because it was just too funny for me not to bring up. But on July 10th of 2017, we got a request from a cultivation center at that time that said, this may seem like an odd request, but at our business, living green is an important concept, and we'd like to consider a different approach for waste management. We would propose to feed our waste cannabis to dairy goats, and then we would test the milk for the presence of THC and CBD. The goats would be fed the cannabis on camera, and the recording would be kept in accordance with the applicable Illinois law. The animals will be well cared for, well fed, and will receive proper veterinary care. The milk will be tested and then destroyed. No part of the animal or milk will be used for human consumption. So that would be the kind of thing that if David got an email about now, we would probably talk about.
First of all, 2017, someone had a novel solution to a problem, right? However, there might be some issues with that solution. Like, this is why I love this conversation, right? We have a business person who is thinking, I'm trying to be in lockstep with the enviros and recycling, and this seems to be good. However, it could pose either public health issues, it may be in conflict with existing regulations, as well as direct conflict with how cannabis needs to be disposed of, requiring a change of the law. And so that's why we're here. Many people think that when we talk about the environment, it's tree hugging, it's going out fishing and camping, but it's highly regulated, especially when it comes to waste streams. And I'm really happy that, David, you had the mind to invite Tess once we jumped on the call yesterday. So thank you for inviting her. And also to those who are on the call, please feel free to drop questions for any of our panelists and speakers. So David, can you share a little bit about what your day-to-day is and roles and responsibilities in IDOA?
Of course. And one thing I just wanted to note too, just because it's worth saying, Tess gave a really great outline of the things that she does day to day right now. But going back to 2019, during her time with the department, genuinely the cannabis industry in its form wouldn't exist if not for the work that she did in crafting those rules and implementing the statutes. She is more involved, and if you'll forgive me, more in the weeds than almost anyone else in the state. She's just a huge resource, and it's really great that she was able to join us today, because truly, between her and our former general counsel, much of the current shape of the ag rules. Yeah, look, I'm a dad of three. I can't help myself. I'm so sorry. It came from Tess, and much of the shape of the current industry and some of the really innovative ways that we were able to do things came from Tess. So I wanted to make sure that we flag that as well, in terms of the leadership that's displayed here. In terms of sort of a day to day, I wish that I had sort of an average day to day. We get, in the first place, we're still kind of trying to build things out. When I came on board at Ag from the commission back in 2020, we were in the midst of COVID. When I started, there were 3 full-time staff, 5 field staff, and that was it. And there were 21 cultivation centers. Now we're almost at 500 licensees. We've expanded from being the Bureau of Medicinal Plants to being the Division of Cannabis Regulation with 3 bureaus. We built out those 2 bureaus, and then we've added a third, which I'm actually sitting in right now. We've actually built one of the first in the nation cannabis reference testing laboratories that's run by the state, which is almost completed. We built this from scratch. It was a former serology lab, which we've taken over, and it is now one of the most state-of-the-art labs in the service to the state, which was built in coordination with our industry partners so that we knew what the needs would be. So in that structure, so we oversee the inspections team, which of course is our field staff. They're out in the facilities day to day. There's the licensing of the Bureau of Licensing and Administration, which many of our licensees will know. They engage with and work with registered agents, with the businesses. They handle business license renewals, other questions. And that's actually one of the focus areas today, because that renewal process is actually where many of the energy and sustainability requirements are, right? Those have to be provided to the department in those renewal documents. So all those regulations are laid out both in the statute and in our administrative rules. And then of course the Bureau of Testing. And so I oversee those bureaus and our staffs, and from any day, it could be, we've got a mold complaint that we're looking into, or, we've got a product registration question and we have to define, for those of you that don't know, the statute says that for product registrations, it can't include animals. And a legitimate question I've had is, does a unicorn count as an animal because it's fictitious? Does the Yeti count as an animal? So having to make those determinations is part of what we do. So, when Tess says we're kind of figuring it out day to day, that's kind of what it looks like. And unlike many of the other regulated entities here at Ag, we don't have 50 years or a century's worth of precedents that we're leaning on, because it's so new. And why Illinois was the 11th state to legalize, Illinois was the first state to actually legalize adult use cannabis through the legislative process. And I was actually lucky enough to get to engage with a number of legislators, including Senator Staines, as the CRTA was being crafted when I was at the commission in Massachusetts, given that I had both Massachusetts experience and Illinois. especially on the section, one of the things I did in Massachusetts was I staffed and chaired the working group on energy and efficiency for the Massachusetts regulations that we rolled out. And they just actually updated that plan, that guidance back in 2021 that we'd originally done in 2018. And again, it was, very initial conversations on how do we make this industry slightly less intensive in its resource use. You were mentioning the extensive environmental impact that cannabis does have, and it's true. The typical craft grow, which starts out at 5,000 square feet, uses about 66 times more energy in a day than the average American household does. At the time the CRTA passed, cannabis cultivation was actually 4% of the total energy consumption of the city of Denver, which was a reference point that advocates used when crafting these requirements. Cannabis indoor growth requires about 4 times more water than the equivalent acreage of wheat, and 11 times more water than the equivalent acreage of corn. Agriculture is Illinois' #1 industry. We are well aware of that at ag. And so, it is a very different, much more intensive commodity than many others that are grown here. And of course, now that's especially a challenge with adopting clean energies, adopting efficient energies with some of the changes that were most recently made in the large omnibus bill passed in Congress that kind of clawed back some of those subsidies and initiatives from the federal government. And in general, it's difficult because many of the tax benefits and other incentives just generally don't apply for the cannabis industry. They're not able to access those things.
And they're not able to access it because it's federally illegal.
Precisely. Or in other cases, for instance, in Illinois, there's a requirement for some of the clean energy use, credits and developments that you gain the cooperation of your local electric co-op, some of which don't engage with the cannabis facilities that are in their co-op territories. We had one that tried to install an extensive solar panel array in an area that really could use it, and the local co-op wouldn't engage with them because of the federal status. Right. And so, no one on this call needs me to go through the laundry list of challenges that the cannabis industry faces. But these same things lead into the impacts on their ability to adopt clean energy efficient technologies across the board. And I feel like I've spoken too much, so I want to roll back because I think you've got more questions.
No, I do have more questions, but I do think that this is a great point of clarification for those on the call. Like, why are we talking about this? We are in the era of climate change, right? And so when we think about the reality of using 66 more times the energy of a household, consider what happens during a heat wave. Everyone's running their air conditioner. It's hot here in Chicago. We're kind of in this moment of heat stress today and tomorrow. So there have been instances that indoor grows have drawn so much energy out of the grid that it creates a blackout for days, maybe even a week for residents. And so where these facilities are located across the state in various counties, if the energy infrastructure is not top notch, we could be setting up our communities to address workforce development issues. We're being environmentally sustainable, but we're not really thinking about what could happen in the event of an intense heat wave that's drawing out a lot of energy. Water, I'm so happy that the community of Mattoon, Illinois now can drink their water, but we are experiencing more harmful algal blooms across the state of Illinois. And so even though we're in the Great Lakes and we have a lot of water, sometimes we have water where it shouldn't be. Sometimes our water is unhealthy, and we're seeing an increase in some of these issues. And so bringing in an industry that's using 6 times, 11 times more of our fresh water comes into direct conflict for what it is that we need our water for in other sectors, which includes recreation, water for wildlife, water for agriculture, water for drinking water, water for wastewater management. And so that's why I'm here, is because it seems like we have at some times put the cart before the horse without recognizing cannabis came along during one of the most volatile environmental moments of our lifetimes. And we want to see them do well, but we don't want to miss the opportunities to do right by the environment. And so with that, what are your thoughts about Illinois having the greenest legislation, and why do you all think it's so important to the state of Illinois agriculture?
That's a great question. And I think as a starting place, my initial thought on that is, does Illinois have the greenest legislation in the country? And I see that not as an accomplishment, but as a challenge. right? And because this industry grows as it develops, it's incumbent on us to provide a regulatory framework that is adaptable, that grows with the industry and learns lessons, not just that we have here in Illinois, but across the country. Coming from Massachusetts, it gives us, there's experience here that allows, access to areas where we can work with our colleagues in other states, work with them to say, hey, what's worked for you? What hasn't? It's just like anything else. Leadership is earned. It's not a permanent status. And just as, I'm very proud and the administration is very proud of the work we've done on having an equitable cannabis industry. The work only started when the CRTA passed, and that is what we have to do here. So on terms of the energy usage, there's a couple things we do, right? There are requirements throughout the statute about, and in our rules about, that start with the initial application for CRTA licensees, as well as the former or the sort of grandfathered 21 cultivation centers that came from the Additional Medical Act. And they have to report to the department water usage, energy efficiency measures that they plan to adopt or have adopted, whether or not they are being consistent with those operations plans that were proposed to us. That covers lighting, that covers the materials with lighting, that involves energy efficiencies throughout the buildings, right? Are you using proper insulation? And even so, we've worked with these facilities so that we can give our expertise, and say, hey, you've got a dry room between these two grow rooms, or between a mother and a bedroom, right? You have two rooms that have an incredible amount of humidity, and you've put your dry room in the middle, and you're having to run your HVAC constantly and be pulling that moisture back out. Why not have those together and put your dry room over here where it's not working so hard? So to that end, there's a couple operational pieces to how we approach this. So when a facility is looking to build out, we have extensive meetings with division leadership, and we've actually brought on a full-time engineer. We were able to get him from IDOT, and we go through those plans. We work with the architects, we work with the engineers. We're able to point out things and lessons learned, areas where we're able to try to be helpful, point out some of those things, as well as the areas in which they have to be compliant. There are a number of consultants and engineers that work with the industry in other states and helping remind them that not only are cannabis laws different in other states, but, zoning laws vary. So how do you be compliant there? And look, we don't get it all right all the time. We're always working at the department to try to be a better partner to the industry as it grows, as it develops. We get feedback from licensees that we try to adopt. We're even right now in the process of updating our build out checklist so that we can better reflect the reality on the ground. And we'll continue to do that. We have this opportunity in cannabis to really be a 21st century regulatory unit that embraces efficiency, that works with the industry to ensure a mutually, beneficial working environment in which we can learn from each other and make sure that the regulations reflect as best as they can the reality on the ground, and we don't get ossified. And that's what my philosophy is, the department's philosophy is, and how we address these things. And I did want to mention, just because you'd asked, or you'd mentioned the 5,000 square feet and the 66 times use, right? Now that's just for a craft grower. And the craft growers as set up by the CRTA are smaller. They start off at 5,000 square feet, and they can expand up to 14,000 square feet of flowering canopy space. So at this moment in time, there are 31 of those currently under construction. There are 20 of them operational, and that's out of a total of 87 total awarded licenses. And then there are infusers. There are 20 of those under construction at this moment, 16 of them operational for, out of a total of 55. Just to give a sense of kind of the scale there. But where that really comes in is that the 21 cultivation centers I mentioned. Those facilities are capped at 210,000 square feet, right? And so when you talk about water or energy use, to bear in mind that there are major differences in scale there. And that's, we're talking about a huge industry in a huge state. And that's why it's so important for us as regulators to be engaging with all of them, from the largest to the smallest, to assist with that. Because as you mentioned, right, these networks aren't automatic. And the focus on energy or efficiency doesn't come naturally always when we're talking about any business, much less, a business that up until a few years ago was federally illegal. So helping to maintain that standard and be a true partner, not just sort of the sword of Damocles hanging over the industry if you don't get it right and we never told you.
Yeah, and I feel like we're also developing this industry during, Illinois loves our data centers, right? So not only do we have data centers and issues with aquifers not recharging, and algal blooms, like where these cultivation centers are being located across the state in particular counties could very well be a mismatch for energy and resources. It also can be seen as less than socially equitable for where they're being located away from the 70% of Black, Illinoisans that live in one of the 102 counties. Like everyone's trying to figure out, where can I make the most money? Where is the least amount of red tape? Where are the most resources that I can gain access to for the least amount? But also I feel like some people are taking advantage of the lack of environmental awareness related to their industries. And so I'm bringing in jobs with this cultivation center. You're not thinking about, oh, our aquifer isn't really, recharging. We're thinking about buying water from American Waters. I really do hope that cannabis is a conversation that moves people to be aware that who we invite into our counties and our municipalities to operate very well could give us, taxes and jobs, but what they need is dwindling and coming into conflict with what the residents need. So I want to put two questions together because I have a really great one in the chat box. How can policy evolve to support outdoor grows that do not require so much energy and allow for more efficiency? And I would like for you also to speak to, in your experience, what are some similar tensions that traditional agriculture has, no matter what the commodity is, growing outdoors and cannabis?
Yeah, I'm gonna take that in reverse because I think that part of one of the things that cannabis has in common in terms of traditional agriculture also speaks to other perils, if you will, associated with growing outdoors. And so one thing about cannabis is, and we all know, cannabis and hemp are the same plant, right? The difference in whether you get marijuana or hemp out of it is basically in how hot it tests. In Illinois, hemp is grown outside. Hemp is different than other agricultural commodities in Illinois because it's the only one that requires you to have a registration with the department to grow it. We don't have farmers registering to grow soybeans or corn or pumpkins. But it faces all of the same hardships and issues that other outdoor agricultural does. Like it's going to have the same problem when there is too much rain, like there has been here for the last couple of weeks, and there's water standing in the field. It's also going to have the same issues of when there is not enough rain and the dirt is so dry that it creates a dust storm. And those things, as well as the perpetual risk of, being too close or just in the wrong place of near somebody else's field. Maybe they're too broad with their application of what they're treating their crops with. Maybe they're not careful enough, right? But you're going to end up with the same sort of drift type problem or issue that other commodities do. I'm not going to bore you guys with this story about cotton and dicamba in Arkansas, but I will just tell you that there was this super cool pesticide years ago called dicamba that was magic for your soybeans. But if you didn't have dicamba soybeans, the dicamba specific tolerant kind, it would kill your beans. And in Arkansas, that situation got so contentious between neighbors and neighboring farmers that someone literally got murdered in the street over it. And that's the kind of, you end up in these conversations about genetics and seed testing and people creating specifically dicamba tolerant soybeans because dicamba is such a great product, which also is not unlike the sort of, okay, now great. Now we've learned that we've made a soybean can take dicamba, but now are we risking it learning something? Are we making pesticides even stronger? Are we making pests even stronger to get past that? And so you have the two, if at the point at which your field is so dry that you're blowing dust across the highway, you have to balance the considerations of, are you going to irrigate? How much water is that going to take? How much energy is that going to take to get the water to the places that it needs to go? Because it is not going to be like a watering can with me in my front porch. And then you also, even if you don't want to go the whole hardcore all natural route. You're not going to pesticide. You're not going to do any extra stuff. You're going to let it plant. You're going to water it. You're going to give it its love and hope for the best. You still are at risk of anybody else's overspray or pesticide runoff or the rest of those things. And the other thing about outdoor growing, which maybe this is obvious to everyone else, it was not obvious to me, but pests are very different when you talk about an outside crop, right? Inside you have like bugs, right? But outside you have animals. I mean, you've got mice, you've got foxes, deer, everybody, all of them. And that is like the maintenance and the effort to keep them out of that is a lot of work too. I have a neighbor who's really fastidious about his lawn, and to the point that he has purchased motion sensors and lights that go off with motion to keep the squirrels off of it. He is obviously on the more extreme end of lawn care, but that kind of energy or defensive action requires energy too, but on a much broader scale when you're talking about even an acre of hemp.
I want to, the question came about because there were some rumors that big cannabis companies were looking to lobby the state for what does it take to grow marijuana outdoors, what type of security, how much, could this happen? And I know that from my experience working in the agricultural sector, those who are not from farming families sometimes can have a very romantic understanding of what it takes to grow, period.
Yes.
And so I dropped some things in the chat box. If you talk to farmers across the state of Illinois, it's tough times, whether it is a drought, if there are prices increasing with nutrients, if there's new regulations on nutrients and phosphorus reductions and how it is you need to manage your land. The profit margins are tight. You're nervous if it's too cold, if it's too hot. You're nervous if there's an infestation or if there is some, new resistant fungus. It's wild out there, right? And so I would love to see cannabis be resource efficient, whether it's indoors or out. But I do feel as though there are some opportunities for those who are coming into farming, right? That's why I frame it as it's an agricultural commodity. That is what it is. For me, it's urban industrial agriculture when you have it in the city, because you're trying to grow 3,000 plants to get them to market within 90 to 120 days. That's industrial. Even though it's considered, a small grow, it can be quite significant when done well, but can be quite expensive depending on, the techniques that you use. So David, do you want to add anything about the connection between growing outdoors resource efficiency?
I think we've covered a lot of it. Dr. Marshall, I mean, you said security, right? The other piece of that that's also important, I mean, we've touched on is biosecurity, right? And that's even more important because you mentioned all these challenges for agriculture, and I'm from Southern Illinois originally, well aware of that. But there's other challenges specific to cannabis too. So cannabis, for instance, shares a genetic link with hops, which is how you make beer. And there's a viroid. It's called the hops latent viroid. And it is a huge challenge, but there are federally approved research facilities that are looking into this. But it infects cannabis too. And there's no treatment for that. A traditional virus, if you know the structure, I mean, it looks almost like the moon lander, right? It's got a lot of flat surfaces it types on. It's got a spike. You can develop that with a protein. You can stop the protein spike sometimes. A viroid, it looks almost like a children's story of a wizard's staff, right? It's all curled around. You can dip an infected plant in bleach and pull it out, and the viroid may still survive, where the plant would not. And so trying to develop, new approaches to that is also a challenge, especially because many federally funded labs, which is most of them, at least until recently, they can't look at cannabis for some of these things. But also working with those changing trends. Aphids like cannabis just as much as they like other things. When we're talking about pesticide, yeah, well, they love cannabis, let me tell you. So
the first time I heard concern about an aphid infestation, I thought I was being teased a little bit. I was like, okay, you guys, let's not pretend that this is a plague. And they're like, no, this is a real thing. And I was like, oh, okay, sorry, yes. I'm here.
And unlike many other traditional parts of agriculture, past the point of pistil development on the cannabis plant, pesticides are not legally allowed to be applied. And there's no resources, right? There's a federally approved list for pesticides that does not exist for cannabis. And so there's a number of challenges there. As Tess was laying out, these very specific genetically designed pesticides and their sort of symbiotic relationship with the plants is something we're not able to see with cannabis because it doesn't work. So, I mean, again, many challenges there, that focus on that. And I would say and I want to actually zone back in on your original question just really quickly. How can policy evolve to support that? I think that's where it really takes the continued engagement and advocacy from those groups you mentioned on this topic. I'm a history major, right? I'm not a scientist as much as I wish I were. We've got a great team of scientists here at Ag, but there's so many more in the industry. So continued engagement and helping us learn to do this better, and how the department can be a resource, how the industry can grow and engage and learn on this. And the industry is doing some really incredible, innovative, adaptive stuff. And I know there's some licensees on this panel, and I don't want to step on their toes, but there's only so much each of us can do alone and in a silo. I think it takes that continued engagement and connection to do it right.
And the education component too, right?
Yep.
To your point earlier, Mila, the number of people who don't necessarily, who have maybe or legislators in particular, right? They have such a broad constituent base who has so many different concerns that to get into, or I was going to try to find another phrase, but to get into the weeds on it is hard on a lot of different topics. And so you need to be able to have conversations with people who are interested in learning and willing to hear about what the things are, like what the actual practical consequences of what's being asked for are. The engagement with the department, certainly, right, as the regulators is 2 thumbs up, would much rather hear from anybody who has a question or wants to do something like that, instead of hearing from somebody else that they were mad at us, but we never talked to them. Like we want to, if there's a way that we can help, we would like to, right? If there's a way that we can help you accomplish this innovative new idea, let's hear it. But there are also some structural things that we kind of can't address or need additional legislation or some other further changes for, and that requires a different kind of education and like advocacy and awareness campaign, really.
I'm happy that you said education, because as you were speaking, I'm like, oh, I wonder, have people ever seen the approved pesticide active ingredients list? So I'm just going to go drop it right there. And this is why I love being a researcher, because I ask questions and I know how to find them. And I appreciate this conversation, because when you said research, I hope that people understand like the extent to which federal oversight creates a bottleneck, and how it is that us at the state level are responsible for moving forward, for developing a pipeline of financial resources that we strategically invest. And so, yes, we have to invest in research and development. We have Dr. Reggie Godino from Cannabis Research Institute here representing the academic community. Absolutely. So we'll be touching upon that. So not only do we need to be educated, but we have to ask the questions at the highest levels, whether it's on the genetics, whether it's on how it is that cannabis interacts, in the field with other crops. What is it doing with the soil? We're in this moment of regenerative agriculture. What are we at risk of if, is cannabis a potential cover crop? Like, I don't know. Super interesting, but it's more than getting people employed. This is literally it's giving Illinois an opportunity to rebrand our agricultural sector, an industry that could possibly lead the way on what does it look like for new age farming, indoor and out. And how do we use our resources more effectively, because they are being compromised because of climate change, as well as other, pollutants and infectious diseases, new viruses. Like, I work with farmers. I want to give everyone a hug. It's not easy at all, but do check those links out, especially the active ingredients list. It's great that Department of Ag is so accessible, very different from some other state agencies. I won't say any names.
I will say, like, I think David and I both would love to be faster at getting back to people. But we'll get there. We just we're not always as quick as we would like to be, right? And particularly David's team has a number of like shared inboxes where different staff check them, and like getting a message to the right place to get it in front of the right person who can then answer it. we definitely want to be responsive. We just aren't always as fast as we'd like to be able to be.
So I know that you all have grown in staff and all of that's happening. Please do check out last year's report for the growth in the department and all of the fines and penalties that was issued. Like, the annual report is where you will find it. Can you talk a little bit about how it is that growers can stay in contact? Are there listservs? Are there quarterly meetings? Are there newsletters? And then also consider, like, you have IWC and, myself interested in being a conduit for conversations. What is it that IDOA is planning, to stay in touch with growers?
Sure. And if you wouldn't mind, I just wanted to touch back on something you said previously really quickly before that question, if that's okay. So when we talk about education, and then you also mentioned pollutants, one of the things I talk about a lot that folks don't realize is that hemp is one of the most effective and efficient phytoremediation plants on the earth. Prior to the acts back in the 1930s that outlawed first marijuana, then hemp, farmers would line their fields with hemp, and it would pull out, because it's hyperabsorbent, it would pull out mercury, it would pull out pesticides, it would pull out lead, other heavy metals, and absorb that into the stalks where it would be remediated in the root structures. It's an incredibly effective plant for that. In addition, it also is one of the most efficient absorbers of carbon from the atmosphere that, again, is available on the earth. The hemp leaf is extraordinarily effective at pulling carbon out of the air, and then again, it sequesters it in those roots, which you can use for industrial purposes. BMW actually does this. They use a lot of hemp as a replacement for the plastics in their doors, because it both serves as a carbon offset and then as a replacement for the plastics that they would use. This also, and this is usually where I get on my soapbox a little bit, this is also why you shouldn't, at this moment in regulated markets, smoke backyard weed, because it has absorbed everything that was in that backyard, especially here in the industrial Midwest. But there's extraordinary application for this. It's virtually limitless, both in terms of the industrial applications and in terms of the carbon and pollutant mitigation that is available through this one plant. And I think that's one thing that we don't talk about a lot, but it's something I think that is very important. So to actually answer your question, how can we continue to engage? I think, the answer, first of all, is events just like this one. We want to continue to be out in the community, hearing through our inspectors, hearing through events like this, working with, again, those who are much smarter than us to learn and be better. That's what this is, right? And that's what we want to be present in these events. The department hosts an annual hemp summit, when we typically invite all the state universities, the industry, academia, to continue to expand on things like that, so that we can hear directly from those who are pushing forward the envelope of science, the frontiers of human knowledge on this subject. Many of them are right here in Illinois, and I'm very proud of that. And I want to continue to be both a resource to those who are doing it and also to benefit from the resources that they can bring.
Thank you. And when you said, as you talked about phytoremediation, I hope you don't mind, some people may not know the language.
Sure.
I did drop the definitions of what phytoremediation is when we say carbon sequestration. Why is this important? Businesses that are emerging during the climate era, we do not have time to mince words. We have to be on the same page with vocabulary. I don't care what industry you're in, everybody's science literacy has to lift, everybody's climate IQ has to lift. And I am going to drop another link that shows contaminated sites around Chicago. There are huge opportunities in remediation of our vacant and derelict properties that decrease the opportunities for economic investment in and around Illinois. So the idea that there is a plant that could grow and thrive on low quality soil that also has been a public health issue or crisis within low income communities, rural in Illinois and here in Cook County, is a game changer. Which is why research and development for hemp, in my opinion, definitely needs to go into that direction. I would love to see secondary products made out of hemp as we capture the biomass and turn it into hempcrete or hemp wood. We are post-industrial. We can be post-industrial and then reclaim some industry through clean or green industries. I would love to see that. But thank you for lifting that up, because we've been so obsessed with marijuana that we're missing the richness of solutions that could really change the landscape in the Great Lakes for farmers, for other industries, for resource efficiency. And I mean, it's a flex if public universities come up with a solution. You know, I love our private schools in Illinois, but it would be really, really great if we were able to make soil cleaner and more affordable.
Yeah. There's a funny, not a funny, there's a video I found, just to mean you're talking about the industrial applications, right? The United States Department of Agriculture in 1942 published a film called Hemp for Victory. And I have a clip of that that's hung up on my wall in my office, right? And there were incredible industrial uses even during the Second World War. An actual battleship used 30,000 feet of hemp rope. You know, the uniforms of many of the Allied nations were ultimately comprised of hemp fibrous material. Illinois went from no acres of hemp in 1941 to 40,000 acres of cultivated hemp by the end of 1940 or the middle of 1945. Illinois is ideally suited for this. It's you know, the topography, the climate, all of it. Illinois is well suited to continue to push forward this boundary and being a leader in this industry. And as you said, I think the opportunities are virtually limitless there.
Yeah, and you know what? I hope everybody is starting to, you know, your hearts soften because of our taxes on cannabis. Those tax dollars are put to great use. They're invested into research and development here in the state. It's reinvestment into expungement and education and literacy. And while I understand that it is really expensive, the fact that we are self-funding solutions makes me extremely proud. I want to open the floor up to other questions. This was lifted by Karina Sample. Does the amount of energy consumed in cannabis affect the amount of capital the industry gets?
That's a great question. And I know that, again, you know, you've got Reese Xavier on here and a couple other folks who have deep experience with the industry. And I want to make sure that over time they have the ability to speak to this as well. I would say, does it have an impact? Almost certainly. Are there other larger factors at this moment in time, you know, given the sudden and abrupt increase in interest rates from the Fed, those cascading effects throughout the rest of the industry, you know, a sudden hike in inflation, and just even the availability of basic raw materials. You know, all of these things have a huge impact on those capital flows. You know, and this is really where some of the goals of, you know, the CRTA come into, I won't say conflict, but, you know, is essentially where the rubber meets the road. We're talking about the need to generate significant amounts of capital, right? For an industry that we are trying to prioritize the development of for individuals who are disproportionately harmed in the war on drugs, making sure that we maintain our status as one of the most equitable in the nation, bringing folks into this that have very little experience operating with the government or operating with, you know, the venture capital folks. These challenges are so interlinked. And that's an area, frankly, where I really wish we were able to or had done more. You know, so we continue to try to do what we can. There are resources available through the Department of Commerce and Economic Opportunity. You know, but as I see it, our biggest responsibility at Ag is continuing to work to make our processes more efficient, transparent, and predictable, so that when licensees are working through those business planning meetings, when they're pitching to investors, they're able to say exactly what the department is going to need and when, so that they can have that for those investors and in those capital markets. And again, we gotta do a much better job, and we're continuing to do it. We're trying to make sure that, you know, as we build that plane midair, you know, and the boarding process is actively underway, at least the wing isn't on fire. You know, but can we also make the boarding process a little more efficient? Yes, and we're going to continue working to do that. But again, to actually go all the way back to the actual question, yes, it has an impact. Do I think there are areas and issues with much more of an impact? Also, yes.
Thank you, David. Asia dropped a question, if you can, from IDOA's participation within the receiving tax dollars, how they're being used. A lot of people don't know how Illinois is using the funds.
Yeah.
So, and of course, if you could speak broadly to the breakdown, and I'll also drop a link that people can see like how the state takes the money and where it's parsed out. But yeah.
Sure, there's a couple different areas. So, and I want to be careful to not speak for the state writ large, but it's split up among a couple of different areas. So one is the R3 program, which is a great program, which again, doesn't just invest in the facilities and areas that were disproportionately impacted, it actually directly invests in those communities themselves. So that is a section of where the revenue from the cannabis program is applied. A percentage of the revenue is also applied directly to the agencies that regulate. So the operational budgets for ag, for DFPR, and just as a sort of just to set level set on that, because Illinois is actually, I think, completely unique in how we regulate. Ag regulates probably like 75 to 80% of the industry. So we regulate cultivation centers, craft growers, infusers, transporters, and then actually one that we haven't talked about that is one of my favorite things we do, which is also the cannabis vocational pilot program, which helps to train the future employees of the cannabis industry right here in Illinois. Um, it's not as the most exciting. It's not the one in the news the most, but when I started, you go to a cultivation center, you'd ask the bud tender, you'd ask the manager, "Hey, where did you learn how to get here?" The answer is always Colorado, Oregon, sometimes California, not as much. Our goal at the department and the administration is to make sure that the next 5 years that answer is Illinois. And then also when you go to Missouri or when you go to Michigan or when you go to Minnesota, if they ever figure out that situation, where did you learn how to do this? The answer is Illinois, and that they come here to learn, they come here to stay and build those careers, not just cannabis specific, but also HVAC focused or IT focused or climate and climate justice focused. How do we do those things and teach them how to do that right here? And so we do those things. But then the Department of Financial and Professional Regulation regulates the dispensaries, and then the Department of Public Health regulates the medical program. I just want to make sure that was clear just because we have this odd separated structure. So that the money goes to those things. And then also there, additionally, some of that money goes into what's called the General Revenue Fund, which then is earmarked for education, for certain law enforcement purposes, et cetera. It looks like you've got that graph pulled up there. Yep.
I love
We also
technology.
Cannabis also contributes, about, I believe it's 10% of the cannabis revenues go to the state stabilization fund, which is almost directly responsible for, some of the highest growth in decades in Illinois, the shorthand for which is the rainy day fund. That's something that, cannabis sales contributes to, which is, directly contributing to the fiscal health of the state as well.
I will say, I did look to see how much the cannabis industry contributes to to our state. I think it's like 1%, which also we could say like we made $1 billion, but then it's like it's 1% of Illinois state revenue, which is small, and you realize like, oh, compared to corn or wheat or soybean, we have some ways to go. But I wanted to share this image with you. Please, that last link will take you to this website. It's in Tableau. I love the fact that there's information readily available for consultants, for
Yes.
entrepreneurs, as well as for professors. And so you spoke about vocational program. I was one of the first hires at Olive Harvey College. I assisted them in writing their curriculum. Learning how to teach this was fun, but even for professors, there were no resources. There's no textbook, right? There's no syllabus. There's no assignments. There are no resources. There were no professional societies. So I came from agriculture. Well, I came from ecology. So I had already been teaching urban agriculture and ecology. Then you have professionals that come from the industry who have no teaching experience, but they have subject matter expertise. And so there was this very unique meeting in the middle, right? And I think that education plays a huge part in the health of this industry, and using our junior colleges and implementing departments that can do research legally, help people get their master's degrees. Like, essentially, I feel like we're doing a really good thing. But we have to finance it. So please do, if you're a business owner, look to see which institutes, which departments are doing things with cannabis. Connect with them, because you never know, you might be a part of an emerging research program, and also just to stay in the loop with, people that are interested in creating new knowledge.
You have to say, I had a chance to go through Olive Harvey and specifically the whole school, and then specifically their cannabis program section. I think it was in May. They're doing incredible work. And I had the chance to meet an individual who was working in the cannabis industry now, who was a graduate of the program, who, because of his work, was now in management at that company because of the program at Olive Harvey, right? I mean, that's incredible. You have this program, which is nascent, which has just stood up. You have a recent graduate who, because of the skills that he was able to learn is now in management of a new social equity craft grower. This is a very hard job, and it's a very hard industry, and those are the moments that make it feel worth that. And it's really incredible. All of Harvard is doing some really great work.
And, I'm looking forward to assisting these businesses become operational. There are thousands of jobs that are held up because growers cannot either identify the capital. They're having issues with getting getting the land. Not everybody's on the same page. The county says yes, but the city and the county says no. So that's taking some time. Issues with bank accounts and accounts being closed and people just wanting to be hands off. And so it's great to know that everybody's aware of all of the tensions, but also how do we pipeline information to business owners to ensure that they get it in a timely fashion and also that they feel present with contributing. People are survey averse, right? It's not mandatory that people participate and answer some of the surveys that IDOA sends out. So in closing, David, can you speak to what the agency is doing to ensure that people feel comfortable reaching out with information and words of encouragement of, when those surveys come out about energy and water, to don't be afraid to answer and provide information so that we can create an equitable industry?
Yes. The first I will say is that the department takes the confidentiality provisions of the CRTA extremely seriously. That information is always protected. Internally, externally, we take that extremely seriously because we know the challenges that you're facing, and we take our charge under the law very seriously. The second piece of that is it's what I said before, right? The department's not out here looking to be a hammer in search of a nail. We're here to be a partner as this industry develops, and those answers help us to help to inform our approach to those policies that we work with. The industry will tell you that for many of the faults that I am certain they have to report, we are very responsive, right? We do update bulletins, we do update policies, we do make these changes on a fairly frequent basis to incorporate the feedback that we get. The one thing I can't do is read minds, right? So if there's a challenge that someone's dealing with, let us know, let me know. We do our best to be responsive, and if you haven't heard from us, bump it again. And we'll work with you. And then in some cases, as we learn things, I can't tell you the number of times we've had someone give us feedback and we say, oh yeah, that makes way more sense than what we were doing. And then we will send out a bulletin that says, hey, we're updating how we approach this. It's something we're always willing to do. We want to continue to grow, continue to learn, from the industry, from science, from what the rest of what's happening in ag, to make this, again, to really continue to earn the distinction of having the greenest, most equitable industry in the nation.
Tess, any final words?
I just the really simple thought of like in terms of survey responding, like if you don't respond to the survey, the information that the agency has is based on the people who do. So I hope that you feel comfortable that they represent you and your voice. Because we've talked a lot about as an agency about information gathering and effects that our various licensees and registrants are feeling with tariffs and other national policy changes. And also though that we don't have a lot of required data sharing with them. So any information that we get is limited by who chooses to participate. And if that's what we've got, that's what we'll work with, certainly, right? But if you're not seeing your voice reflected in those things, please talk to us.
And with that, thank you, Tess. Thank you, David. We will make sure
Thanks
that
for
you have
having
their
us.
contact information. This has been great. If you have any other questions for them, you can drop them in the chat box. I have told them I will direct them to them and make sure that participants receive those responses. With that, thank you all so very much, and hope you all are staying cool in Springfield.
Thanks so much. If you come down for the fair, let us know. We'll show you the hemp plot.
It'll be my first time at the state fair. I am definitely coming this year.
I can't wait.
I'll let you all know.
And that's for everybody else on here. There's a hemp plot down by the shed just down from the butter cow. So come see us. We'd love to talk about hemp with you.
Very cool.
Thank you.
All right. I hope you all enjoyed that conversation. I feel like Department of Ag is one of those engaged agencies. I mean, most people in the county are not farmers. And so you can find yourself like not understanding what they do, but it's been really impressive seeing David grow the cannabis sector. Definitely look out for jobs and opportunities. I am always a fan of working for the state, working from the inside and out. So do follow along, reach out and ask if there are any opportunities for employment. I know I am, not just in cannabis, but other areas of Department of Ag. And if you missed the story earlier about them trying to feed the waste material to the goats and then wanting to test the milk, you missed a great story. Like, agriculture is the wild, wild west, but really fun stuff and really informative conversation. With that, we will move right along. I'm going to ask for my next panelist to come off mute and on video. We have Reese Xavier from HT23. He is an entrepreneur and CEO of the organization, a Black-owned craft cannabis company dedicated to quality, innovation, and community empowerment in Illinois. He is also a prominent advocate for economic inclusion in the cannabis industry, serving in leadership roles that promote social progress and industry development in the Chicagoland area. We also have Dr. Reginald, affectionately known as Reggie Godino, who has joined Discovery Partners Institute as the inaugural director of the Cannabis Research Institute, also known as CRI. He brings over 20 years of experience as a patent scientist and a specialization in biochemical networks and plant phytochemistry. His notable accomplishments include developing the first DNA-based diagnostic assay for cannabis at Steep Hill and leading research and development and breeding programs at Front Range Biosciences. Last but certainly not least, we have Anton Seals Jr. He's a South Shore Chicago native and leader dedicated to racial equity, community development, and environmental justice. He serves as co-founder and lead steward of Grow Greater Inglewood, an organization transforming vacant lots into urban farms led by Black and brown growers. Additionally, he founded Organic Urban Revitalization Solutions, a cannabis company, and actively works in arts advocacy and community development, serving on several boards and receiving fellowships for his leadership. I am with some of the greats. I know, is Anton here? I saw him pop on, maybe he dropped off, but he'll be joining in a few minutes. Thank you, gentlemen, for being here. How's everybody doing?
Good, thanks. How are you?
Oh, I am hot, okay? It is warm outside. It's so warm, my computer is starting to go a little bit. So if I drop, I promise I will be right back. Oh, he's having issues with Zoom, so Anton will be here shortly. So what did you all think of the fireside chat?
I thought it was great.
Yeah.
It's always good to know that the person who's in charge of ag has a lot of insight and knowledge, not only about the policies and things like that, but about the plant itself. Some of the information he dropped, I thought was pretty cool. I was actually surprised he knew it.
I'm going to second that last part. He was far more knowledgeable than I thought he would be. So,
I feel like cannabis requires everybody to know all the things, and so it's interesting how much people don't know about what goes on in the hemp space, and with the farm bill versus what's going on with marijuana. Even in marijuana, there's medical, and then there's adult use recreational. So it's all over the place. I deeply appreciate it being able to connect the regulatory aspect to like the law and what could come into conflict with what we think should be happening. And then also like traditional agriculture, like these tensions exist no matter if you're growing indoors or out. And hopefully us just raising our environmental IQ to understand some of these solutions, we do need to ask some questions, which, why it is you all are here. So Reggie, I do want to kick things off with you. We did talk a little bit about, the importance of research and development, whether that was on understanding soil dynamics or even genetics. In your opinion, I know you were at Discovery Partners Institute and, the lead of the Cannabis Research Institute. In your opinion, how important is cannabis research that's specifically focused on sustainable practices within Illinois? Cannabis, like how important is that research to the industry?
I know we're focused here on Illinois because we're all residents and we work in Illinois, but I think this is a more general question, right? So, and the importance of cannabis research for sustainable practice anywhere is how I look at it, right? And I can't begin to state enough how important it is, right? So just some examples, right? So cannabis cultivation, especially outdoors, well, let me take out that qualifier. Cannabis cultivation, period, is a very resource intensive endeavor, right? So lots of water, lots of energy, whether that energy comes from the sun or from electrical input, right? And so research that could help reduce, drought tolerant cannabis that would allow us to use far less water, and that affects two things. That affects water conservation, right? But then it also decreases the amount of runoff and potential exogenous, fertigation that occurs with the plant. It'll reduce that runoff that goes back into the water table as well, right? So things like that. You know, is it possible to develop, varieties that would allow us to do more than one thing with one crop, right? Thereby reducing the number of acres to be able to get at the same amount of product, right? Um, you know, uh, plants that are more naturally pesticide or pest resistant, right? So we don't have to use pesticides, again, helping with environmental conservation, right? And none of these things have been looked at. Largely, hemp, as we know it, has been unmodified and unimproved since the 1930s, when all of this prohibition started in the first place, right? So I can't begin to state how important it is, because everything that we know about agriculture and the things that we've done to improve crops in every other plant that we consider an important, either agricultural or cash crop, has never been done in cannabis, right? So there's that level of improvement that can be done, and to see the benefits from. So.
Thank you for that. Every year, I teach at Loyola in Chicago State, sometimes for junior colleges here. I present to folks like, there are interesting questions that can be posed with cannabis. And I always lift up Berkeley's program. So I'll drop the link there, where they're studying everything from land use to issues of engagement with wildlife to water pollution and, just all of the things, right? With legal and illegal cannabis grows. Information at this level, like primary literature, research, we use that to inform policy, right? Reggie, can you quickly just touch on how hard is it to get money to study cannabis, right? And I know that you're in a unique position, where we think like, oh, let's just do research. Talk a little bit from the perspective of, you're responsible for securing the money. You have to secure it from others. You can't take it from industry. How challenging is it for you to fund research in cannabis right now?
I'm about to pull all my hair out, because I'm literally in the throes of this right now. So first of all, right, because of the as much as we would like to think of cannabis as a legal plant, right, federally it remains illegal, right? So because of that, universities and other universities and well-established businesses have a fear of cannabis money, right? So people would like to think, oh, the cannabis industry is just swimming in money. Well, that money, A, that's not necessarily true, and B, the companies that do have a lot of money can't even really give it away, right? Because there's this, fear that accepting money from the cannabis industry will cause an issue with if you receive federal grants, right? So money from the cannabis industry is largely off the table. Money from the hemp industry is almost non-existent, because the hemp industry is largely doing rather poorly in the United States, right? So that's not the case in Canada and in Europe, where the hemp industry is thriving better. I wouldn't say it's great, but it's doing better, right? So then you have the problem with limited federal funds. There are very few programs at the federal level that will give out money. So and because of the changes in the administration, I want to keep this as neutral as possible. Those programs that were available are likely going to be either reduced or axed completely, because now the new head of the DEA is anti-cannabis, or the one who was about to be confirmed as the new head of the DEA is anti-cannabis. And campaign promises that were made along the way seem to have fallen by the wayside, right? So the federal government is not the best place to go look for cannabis dollars for research. Unfortunately, the federal government doesn't seem to be a good place to go look for any research dollars for any type of research, right? So because all of those programs are getting cut. NIH and NSF are looking at least a 40%, if not larger, cut to their budgets. And so, what was already a very difficult prospect, where somewhere between 1 in 8 to 10 applications are funded. So if you think about it from that perspective, it's a 1 in 8.25 to 10% chance of you submitting an application and getting funded. With the money getting cut 40%, that number is likely to go down to more likely 1 in 15 to 1 in 20, or even less, right? So it's going to be harder and harder. There were very few places where they were actually giving out money for cannabis research in the first place. The USDA was one of them to help it, but it was specifically to help crop improvement type of research. So, but again, there's not a lot of crop improvement being done in hemp. And some of the research was on things that could be considered cannabis in general were along the lines of mechanistic research into cannabinoids and terpenes. A lot of money is still being put out there for harm studies, which is unfortunate because that's not really a true measure of what can be done or what the benefits are potentially of hemp. You need to approach things from a very neutral perspective and present data as it comes out, whether it's harmful or beneficial. But when the title of a grant program is looking at at potential harms of cannabis, that you kind of get an idea of what they're looking for, right? So and then the other places where we're going to start looking for, right, is in philanthropic organizations and those kind of other foundations that tend to have programs that are specific for either health, wellness, particular types of medical or the word I'm looking for, or other or types of human wellness research, right? So you think about places like the Chan Zuckerberg Foundation here in Chicago that does inflammation research, right? So it just so happens that cannabis can be used to help combat inflammation, right? THCA, CBD, right? So and so what that means for us, as opposed to looking to do research that is directed towards basic information or crop improvement or medical therapeutics, right? We are now forced to look at these organizations and build programs that fit their kind of needs, right? Not necessarily saying that that's good or bad, but it does kind of narrow the focus of the research that will be done in cannabis and hemp, because now you're chasing money as opposed to chasing science, right? So the prospects are difficult. They're not likely to get better within this federal administration. And so it gets harder and harder to do the kind of work that we need to be able to advance information in cannabis and hemp, and to do things like build better crops that will help hemp growers in the Midwest do a better job, because they're not trying to use seed that was developed on the East Coast or the West Coast that has no real bearing to what climate we have here in the Midwest. So
Thanks so much, Reggie. Reese, I want to get you in, and I started thinking about, when I started my lawn care business years ago, it's not an operation anymore. I was able to go to the Small Business Association. I was able to look online and find reports and information and data that's generated by state agencies, government agencies, to create a strong business plan, operations, identify what it is that I was going to do so I could be profitable. And I realized that you don't have access to that, right? Not only don't you have access to that, but you're in a state that now is letting you know, like, hey, these are the types of practices we wish to become mandated, arguably making it more expensive for you, right? So can you talk a little bit about, from a business owner's perspective, how you have embodied sustainability, maybe some of the tensions that you've experienced, but how you continue to move forward in your company to become operational, even though there's not a lot of capital and there are these additional requirements?
Yeah, I think you really hit it on the head. When we first started down this path, everything we were thinking about was long-term sustainability. And there's a lot of benefits for that, really. It's not that we are ultra sensitive about the environment and things like that, although we are. It's really one about controlling the planet, controlling the product, and controlling costs. When you operate in an efficient manner, like our how we intend on growing is aeroponically. Aeroponic, the water consumption is maybe 90% less than your traditional cultivation method, right? So that saves us water. It's also beneficial to the environment. We were thinking about, high efficiency LED lights. Now, there is LED lights that you can go, and then you can go to a higher efficiency. The benefit of that, it saves costs, it saves energy downstream. We were looking at solar, saves costs and downstream. All of it's great. It's difficult to do because it costs a lot of upfront money. And how you let this off, the access to capital extremely limited. So it really puts a lot of owners and entrepreneurs in a box where it says, do I become operational in a less efficient manner, in a long-term costly manner, in a long-term less efficient manner? But it enables me to get up. It enables me to start generating revenue, and hopefully it will enable me to attract some type of additional investment. Typically, with upstarts like myself and new license holders, all you really have, other than your personal credit and your personal, finance, and depending on how everybody on your cap table look, that's all you really have when you're going to apply for loans. For the handful of institutions that will. So everything else is a nice business plan. It's just a piece of paper. It's just numbers on a paper in a federally illegal industry.
So oh yeah, I'm sorry.
No. So it makes things extremely challenging and difficult. Now, that being said, you still have to, for me anyway, I continue to push forward and say, okay, how can I scale down the operations and still plan for the long term, leveraging efficient manners? So that's kind of the space that we're in now.
Thank you. And I do have a question for everybody on the call. Feel free to drop it in the chat box, and guys, you can answer too. Do you all intentionally buy from companies that are environmentally friendly? Do you intentionally buy from companies that are environmentally friendly? Is that something that you absolutely do? You can drop yes, you can drop no. I'll say I asked that question because we're developing companies in an era where we believe that buyers will choose us. They'll choose to pay it forward, right? Like, I'm going to buy from you because you are environmentally friendly. However, buyers and consumers are making the same decisions. Do I buy the thing that causes harm because that's what I can afford, or it helps me earn a little bit more money so that I can afford to be environmentally friendly in the future? It feels like we're all in this position of how can we be best actors while not working ourselves into operating in the red and possibly bankruptcy, right?
That's right.
And I am concerned for Black and brown businesses. As someone in the environmental field for 20 years, it is apparent that we have the least environmental knowledge. We have the least entrepreneurs that have access to consultants within the sustainability field that look like us, that understand our markets and understand the supply chain that we would like to engage in. We are operating in places where it's really expensive to operate anyway. And so it's a disincentive, right? Unless you're legally going to make me do it, I'm just going to do what I can afford, because it isn't cheap, to try and do the right thing. But you've been successful with HT23, right? And you also have engaged with Department of Agriculture. So can you talk a little bit about, from the place of a grower, we see that Illinois has the greenest legislation, and Department of Ag says that people have to fill out, like a survey or response. What is that like? Is it cumbersome? Is this kind of easy? What do growers have to do in reporting?
Yeah, it's a survey that you basically fill out, and the first time you fill out, it is a bit cumbersome. But the good thing is it doesn't change very often, so you can take your answers, almost a copy and paste, and then tweak the changes as they occur in real time. So for instance, many of the questions that I answered around, operations, it's NA. So copy paste is pretty easy. Once we stand up, now I just have to change those portions. And as the business changes, changes. But the first time is pretty cumbersome. Everything after that is pretty easy, actually.
And Reggie, as far as Cannabis Research Institute goes, how are you kind of growing the conversation across the state? I know that there are particular campuses, right? There's Chicago, University of Illinois, Chicago. There's Champaign-Urbana. There's down in Springfield. What has that been like for DPI in expanding the conversation of cannabis and possibly even inviting the types of research questions that could benefit sustainability in the state?
So, that's a good question. And so it allows me to actually segue back. So one of the funding sources that I forgot to mention is the state, right? So CRI is actually funded by the state, but it was on a startup basis, right? And we're hoping to prove our value so that the state will continue to want to fund us, right? But we're looking for this blended funding stream that I kind of mentioned, right? So, but the contract under which we operate, has certain deliverables. One of which is actually for us to kind of be geographically, equitable, right? So we can't focus on the Chicagoland area. We are, so that means that we, kind of by definition have to expand our view outside of Chicago and integrate ourselves with the not only the other University of Illinois campuses, but also because of the way the deliverables in the contract, we're kind of tasked with bringing the entire state's research program up along with us, right? So so the way we're going about this is to so we have a number of community engagement events. We had one that we put on ourselves back in June, and then one of our partners at UIC is putting on another series of events so that we can kind of gauge the information needs around the state from the different stakeholders. And when I say stakeholders, we're talking about not only researchers at various universities and community colleges, or the needs of the community colleges and their cannabis programs, potentially, healthcare professionals, legislators, policymakers, all these people. So we have we have kind of an information gathering kind of phase that we're in right now, so that we can identify the needs that the different areas around the state and the different stakeholders around the state are interested in learning more about, so that we can kind of focus the programs that we're building and the research that we're doing to fill those gaps, right? So that's kind of the first thing. The second thing is we are actively looking to participate and collaborate with other universities and and entities around the state. We currently have a cancer research program that we've initiated and filed a grant for with Northern Illinois University. We are working on a couple of sickle cell disease related projects with a researcher at UIC. Mila, you and I have been in discussions with the people at Springfield to kind of look at brownfield remediation around the state as well, and involving potentially, UIS and SIU. And so, we are actively trying to find projects that are multidisciplinary and cross collaborative in terms of working with different universities and other campuses within University of Illinois. And the last thing I would say is that we're also trying to kind of bolster what's happening at the community college level, because we're kind of doing a needs assessment and looking to find ways to be able to partner with and involve community colleges as well. One of the things that we would like to do at CRI is kind of put together a STEAM kind of program so that we can help, with some workforce development, with some internship programs to get hands-on experience to those interested, in pursuing or maybe not pursuing, but learning more about what is involved, what it takes to do, rigorous cannabis science, right? So those are the kind of programs that we're putting together, and that we're opening up around the state and trying to involve other members around the state as well. So,
thank you. Just a reminder in the chat box, please do drop your questions. I will get to them in a moment. Reese, I want to tag you back in as a business owner. In your opinion, what resources are needed to better support sustainable and equitable growth of minority cannabis enterprises in Illinois from a grower's perspective? And I know you said, like you all aren't finished standing up. I want to say maybe less than 10% of those that have received a craft grow license have been able to become operational. And so it's a real bottleneck. So what resources do you think, are needed?
Yeah, I'll just start with the obvious. Obviously, is access to capital. I think that's hugely important. I also still think, I was thinking about this question yesterday, like there should be greater incentives for craft growers to invest, or cultivators for that matter, to invest in more efficient growing methods, whether it's high efficiency lights, HVAC, high efficiency HVAC, whether it's solar, what have you. Because right now, everyone knows that the taxes are extremely high in the state of Illinois, and there's a lot of reasons. I think if the vast majority of cultivators operated in a more cost efficient, that'd be less burden on the grid. There's a lot of less taxing on the water supply. There's great advantage for operating in an efficient manner. And it seems to me that the state could offer these incentives that cannabis operators are looking for, reduce taxes, and it's a benefit to the state in terms of sustainability. I think education, you mentioned this a little bit earlier, is huge. It's so much information about how to operate in an efficient way that many operators, we just don't have the time to think about.
Yeah.
And we should. We absolutely should. But you're worrying about getting your operation stood up. You're worried about marketing. You're worried about getting relationships, get your product in the market. You're worrying about, local politics. You're worried about state politics, federal, so many things you're worrying about. And it just seems like operating in an energy efficient manner starts to go down the list in terms of priority.
Yeah.
But it shouldn't. It shouldn't, because it's easy to think about today. It's harder to think about tomorrow. And that's one of the largest takeaways for me is like, most times people do this in your life. If I only knew what I knew today back then, right? And it's like having someone to provide that information so you can't use that as an excuse. You do know today. You do know. And now you have choices to make. Do I make this investment today for my long-term success? So education is also a key thing I think that would be beneficial for operators.
When I think about whose responsibility that is, having been on the consulting side during the writing of the legislation, working for a nonprofit during, the implementation of that bill, working as a professor teaching, being on a national board, for it. I see things so differently. And the one group of people that have been educating everybody on energy, on water, on climate, are really, really silent in packaging information specifically for this industry. And that's the enviros. If you look around, like, I don't hear the voices of the Nature Conservancy or the Sierra Club. And this is not, like a finger wag, but it's a clear missed opportunity for an industry that wants to do right by the state and the counties and cities they're operating in. Somewhat disconnected from environmental legislation and agricultural legislation as well, that could actually come into conflict with your operations. And so right now, I believe cannabis grows do not have to have a pollution permit, right? Like you all are kind of regulated like a nursery. So you're allowed to use particular chemicals and pesticides, of course, not on that, on the approved list, but there's not an additional step that you're required to do, as laid out in the Clean Drinking Water Act, for example. That could change, with pesticide application.
Right.
I think there was a piece of legislation that moved last year where now there has to be a training and an annual certification, I believe, that also comes with a fee. So it could be more costly to do certain work or work with certain practitioners, but there's a bit of a disconnect because we're not seeing or talking about cannabis in all of the ways. And so that's, again, why I'm here, is to keep the conversation going, because environmental regulations could really put people out of business. And when we were authoring this and I, was looking at what we're suggesting, I immediately said, we're making this more expensive for craft growers who are probably going to be Black and brown. We know that there is a lack. We see it in non-cannabis industries. Why don't we have more environmentally friendly, insert the blank, right? Electrification is really challenging in our community. Not everybody has access, to capital to get an electric car. We're looking at our appliances and we're still using, outdated appliances, and, the infrastructure isn't there for some of our communities. It's the industry wants to be forward. The resources aren't really available. The buyers are not very informed. So it feels like you entrepreneurs are really the kind of like frontline community of helping legislators understand what resources should be coming, which is why I lifted up CEJA. And maybe that's the next conversation, is bringing in folks from CEJA to outline, here are the resources that are most relevant to infrastructure for cannabis. This is how much money you can save. This is, maybe thinking more specifically about where are those other programs in the state that somebody just needs to translate. Like, yes, cannabis is eligible. However, it may not appear as such because it's not in the language. And so I would love to be a part of that pipeline, because people don't have time. And even the consultants that you all hire can have a very limited, ability.
Got to be careful with those consultants. I got to tell you.
Yeah, I'll say that. Come to me and I'll let you know how to vet them, because that's another, people don't know what they're doing, is a problem. So
I'll say this really quick. I think, to your point, I think that was a missed opportunity, because I know back as early as 2015, I saw where the country was going in terms of state legalization of cannabis, right? And that's almost the perfect time to start having these conversations, because you see state by state, they're coming online, which means you have new entrepreneurs in the business, probably new folks into urban agriculture. What a huge opportunity to provide this education. And again, doesn't necessarily mean I have to choose that, although I should. It doesn't mean I have to. But if I have the information, I'm in a better position to make decisions. I'll use as a quick example. You mentioned electric cars. I bought a electric car back, maybe 11 years ago, right? And it was tough. It was pretty expensive at the time, but I was driving one of these big trucks, gas guzzling trucks, and I was traveling quite a bit of work. And I said, well, you know what? It's very tough, and it's challenging to kind of make this payment, but I'm gonna do it because I saw the long-term benefit. Now, today, car's paid for, and I'm practically I'm loving it now. So these are business decisions that folks have to make. Maybe it might be a tough squeeze to operate in an efficient manner today to start with, but downstream, assuming you're going to make it downstream, the benefits just pay itself over hand over fist.
We've tried to see this in urban ag also. Like I was here when the word food desert came.
Yeah, that's right.
Alive, right? This is like 2009, 2010.
Mhm.
I was really excited how cannabis kicked off at the Chicago Food Policy Summit. We were in that room and I'm like, okay, like I'm excited because we're talking about urban agriculture. And as the industry began to mature, you saw a complete separateness, that there were no workshops being hosted by the urban agriculture groups for people that are planning on being growers. And you had growers who were passionate of hiring people and starting businesses, be left completely with no resources, even though we have folks that have been teaching and training people how to grow food commercially for nearly a decade.
Mm-hmm.
Enviros that have been fine-tuning their climate change messaging and trying to diversify their volunteer base. And cannabis small craft growers were just kind of abandoned.
Yeah.
But it was completely shocking. And so I hope that there will be some reconciliation, because there are people that are willing to work in cannabis that have been trained in urban agriculture that don't need a certification from Olive Harvey, right? They know how to grow commercially. They just need the jobs, right?
Yeah.
And then you have enviros that want people to understand how to be climate champions because of how they're operating. Well, help us understand what are the resources, how can we align ourselves with some of these, issues, because we too want clean air, healthy land, healthy water, so we can have a really great product.
I'll throw this at you as a question. I wonder if, and what's your thoughts, does the ignoring of craft growers and probably largely cannabis industry, is that a reflection of the drying up of capital and the access to capital in the industry?
No, I think it is a reflection of people do not understand the ecosystem of ag, period. That is what it is. I come from, like, you all are growing a crop. It could be tomatoes, potatoes. If you were making French fries, people would understand what it is that you were doing. They would understand the machines that you need, the waste that you're generating, the space, all of the things. Suddenly it's cannabis, and we totally forget that it is a plant, right? We also forget that agriculture is heavily subsidized anyway by the federal government. So there's some misunderstandings of how it is that food, fuel, and fiber are financed, and the banks that actually do that. So there's farm banks, right? Not every bank invests into agriculture. And then you have investors and venture capitalists that are hesitant because they're working with entrepreneurs that also do not know how to articulate that they can be successful, even though they have no experience. That's also a huge bottleneck that I've seen. I've talked many people off the ledge. Folks wanted to be growers. They can't even grow a mustache. They can't even connect, right? They've never grown anything a day in their life. They have the capital, but they have spent 20 years in a sector or an industry. They've never owned and operated a business. So they come and they're pitching these really great ideas. However, an investor is looking, like, they're asking very unique questions about your ability to make decisions in a volatile market, compromised supply chain, and mixed federal state landscape. If you cannot help people understand how you're going to grow, as well as be on the forefront of pushing for change, because Reese, that's what you do. I see you in Springfield more than my state rep.
Yeah, I'm there.
You are there. You are doing the work. Not a lot of entrepreneurs understood when this legislation came on. We're building it, like we may not see this come to full maturity for another decade.
That's right.
So I think that's a bit of the holdup. If we had better models for how to invest in agriculture, if we have seen success in urban agriculture, Many of our farms and gardens, they're not operating in the black. So we haven't even seen evidence of we can take something from the ground to market, hire people, and be profitable. So I think there was a missed opportunity in urban ag, or even for growers to look at the models for who were the partners, how did they scale, where did they sell, you know, like how long did it take for them to grow, what expertise is needed on their team in order for them to be, truly successful. So I'm hopeful.
So can I jump in here? Because I think everything you guys said is spot on, and there's one extra layer that comes on the hemp side, right? So if you look at traditional ag, wheat, corn, soybeans, you buy your seed, right? And before you put your plant in the ground, you likely have a contract with a set price based on quality. Exactly. You have a buyer. Exactly. And you know where it's going, right? So the other missed opportunity was a lack of information provided to those people who jumped into the hemp industry in Illinois and other places, because there is no end-to-end market, right? You don't have that knowledge. You don't have that broker who is going to end up taking your product after it's been baled and move it along for you, right? Further, there's the aspect of hemp processing plants, right? So that's a thing, because you got to do something with the hemp after you've baled it, right? And so where does that happen in Illinois? Well, it doesn't at all, right? Like you got to take your stuff from Illinois to Kentucky or Missouri or wherever, right? So there's now additional costs for trucking, right? And then God forbid you got to cross a state line. I mean, we're fortunate because we just have to go left or right, and we're in a place that has hemp processing, right? But let's say you're not in one of those places, and you have to cross a state like Nebraska that doesn't want you to truck your stuff across their state, right? So that adds all sorts of problems. And so I think another missed opportunity was on the state side for the state for itself to better understand the needs to make this a viable industry within the state, so that there could be better levels of success for those people who did take the first steps and invest as well. So
I would love to see a cannabis friendly bank for growers specifically. I would love to see crop insurance be affordable. I would love to see Illinois be the leader in that, and take advantage of other states not being so proactive, because that's, we were, before some of the other adjacent states came online, we were getting people crossing the state lines to buy. And so I think having entrepreneurs cross the state line so they can get affordable services is something that's fair. And I think entrepreneurs were and still are somewhat oblivious to the work that is required of them if they wish to be even to see this actually mature. It can feel really like, oh, the state doesn't want us to operate, and people are trying to hold us back. Many people came to cannabis for the first time and had never understood how to read legislation. They've never civically engaged, and this is their first entree. So there are these heightened expectations, and some folks are radically optimistic at how fast the state moves, how amenable your elected officials are to your conversation or your soror or your frat. Like, oh, I thought we was like, yeah, no, everybody's not on the same page. Or even the expertise that exists within the state. And so you may have the money, and you may have the space, and you may have the will to operate efficiently, but then the consultants and who you have access to, how much they cost, that can become the issue for your, for your business. And then also the price for the, for the product. Like if you're going to pass it on to the customer, now the taxes are high and your packaging is biodegradable and you're using soy-based ink and no dyes, and that is a $300 10 gummies, right? Like
That's right.
we can't do that. But you're experiencing that tension in cannabis, and so too are folks that have, we have vineyards in a state and they are growing organic wine, but they can't afford to prove that they're growing organically. And so this greenwashing and mandating can seem to be protective of the environment, but it can be really harmful to small businesses. It can dissolve this network of home, like community businesses that hire from the community, just making it completely not profitable, right? And that's not what we want. So I want to start to wrap things up. Any other questions, for our panelists? If you have any additional resources, to see what's happened with hemp when hemp became legal with the Farm Bill, it was you grow hemp. And then by the next year, it was like down 75% because people forgot this was illegal for almost 100 years. There's no demand, there's no processing, there's no one to, we don't even know which strains are best for food, fiber, or fuel in our state. And our poor farmers, I feel like we threw them under the bus, and they had harvests that they didn't know what to do with, no one to buy it. And, it was a bad thing. And so I would love to see the projects with DPI and hemp, what that could mean for our economy, and how we can support our small businesses. So final words, Reggie, Reese, maybe I'll start with Reggie and then I'll let you finish us off, Reese.
Yeah, no, I everything you just said is 100% spot on, right? We absolutely need to do a better job to help grow the hemp industry in Illinois. Illinois is a major ag state, but it's not a major hemp state, right? So there's a disconnect there. We're great at growing stuff in this state, but we're not anywhere near even not even the middle of hemp producing states in the United States, right? So, I think that has to change, right? I mean, there are so many uses, and this is one of the things that CRI is trying to change the view on, right? So is that there are so many things you can do with hemp, right? So let alone the CBD, the THC, and the medical therapeutics and all that other stuff, right? So you talked about hemp fiber, you talked about hemp as food, right? But then let's talk about hemp as a disruptive input into other manufacturing, like things like flavonoids, which are used in cosmetics, to use as in formulations for medicines and stuff like that, right? So as a carrier, so we get certain flavonoids from things like blueberries. Well, on an acre for acre kind of analysis, cannabis and hemp can be used to get some of these same flavonoids as cheaply, if not more cheaply, than from the current sources, right? So you can use hemp for construction materials, flame retardant hempcrete. You can use hemp as a biofuel source. UIUC is doing all sorts of work on switchgrass because that's the current top, rated biofuel producer. Well, you can use biomass that's already been used for other aspects, like oil extraction or fiber or whatever, to also make that biomass that turns into biofuel, right? Many people don't realize that since 1994, Mercedes-Benz has been using hemp as a material in their cars, right? They don't talk about it because they don't want people to freak out. Oh my God, cannabis in my car, right? So, but it makes plastics, it makes biofuels, it makes high-tech products that can be used on the space shuttle or as superconductors, right? So there are so many aspects that we never hear about. And if we did talk about these things, we could actually drive revenue and business into this sector. So that's it for me.
Hey, let me just, first of all, thank you. Right now in Springfield, we have this cannabis versus hemp debate, if you will. And oftentimes, what we are talking about is taking intoxicating hemp and putting regulations on that or cutting it out altogether, that's like a fraction of the benefit of hemp. And it just seems like everybody jumped into it thinking about the intoxicating portions of it and totally ignoring everything that you just said. I mean, it's entire industries that could be run by hemp at, cost effectively, probably stronger textiles, so many things. But we have a silly conversation about taking the intoxicating portions or breaking it down into D9 or D8 or something like that. Like, we need to have more, if we're talking about hemp, we need to have more conversations about industrial hemp and how you can leverage the plant and grow the plant and use it in a lot of manufacturing capacities, and shift away from this, because there's this argument that, oh, we're protecting Black and brown businesses with hemp. Are you really? Because there's huge industries that you can stand up and prop that could be Black and brown run, but you need access to land, you need processing facilities. That alone, standing up a hemp processing facility, and assuming you have, customer base, obviously, is a huge opportunity for Black and brown business. But we're focused on nonsense. I'll say it that way to keep it.
No, I like that perspective as well. And here's, I think, where the state can step up is, so either take the initiative and invest some of the CRTA tax money back into building a processing facility or two at strategic locations where, nobody's going to want to drive their bales of hay 8 hours, right? So a couple of strategically placed, hemp processing facilities would do wonders to drive business, back up in hemp as well, right? So, and education and kind of, programs that will help people understand what you can in fact do. Because I think, as you said, right, we're just seeing it as a workaround form of
That's right.
cannabis, right? That's it. That's all we've ever, right? It's time to stop having that conversation and to start having some of these other conversations. So
I often talk about what I want to do with the cannabis industry, and it's way beyond the plant in and of itself, right? It's standing up adjacent businesses and doing things where you can hire folks and give folks the same opportunities that you have. But that takes future thinking. That takes long-term thinking. You have to think in the future and stop thinking about today. The unfortunate part that we have about this intoxicating hemp is folks who think today and can't think strategic long term. Because if I were to be in the hemp business, I'm thinking long term. How can I get a contract with Mercedes Benz? How can I get a contract with a clothes?
Patagonia or
Exactly.
Levi's, who
Yes.
have both said that
Correct.
by 2030 they want to have 50% of their textiles
Amen.
come from hemp, right?
Amen. That's strategic thinking, and I'll try to button this up to what we were talking about earlier. Is this is the kind of education that we need in many regards in this cannabis industry. Remember that it's still a nascent industry by and large. Many folks who have jumped into this industry, and I'll say, including myself, have our knowledge of selling cannabis was at a local level. Let's say it that way.
At a
Right?
very local level, yes.
At a very local level, right?
I think we all started there, so yeah.
But also understanding that, and I think I've been fortunate because of my professional career prior to cannabis. I knew the value of building a network and tapping in with folks like Dr. Marshall, tapping in with folks in Chicago Normal, tapping in with other cannabis industry, tapping in with political folks who understand the politics, right? And then when you're tapped into the network, you have a lot of access to information. Now you are in a better place to make decisions on how you should run your business, right? And it feels, and I could be wrong here, but it feels like we could do a better job of tapping into the network. We can do a better job of accumulating information and sharing that information, so Black and brown businesses and those who want to participate in the cannabis industry are able to, make better decisions on how to stand up and operate their businesses.
And with that, gentlemen, thank you for the passionate ending responses. I feel like we have to do this again, specifically on hemp. I want everybody to turn their attention to the chat box. I put in the cost of securing licenses to grow and to process hemp. It is exponentially less than working in the marijuana space, and there is no lottery. I put that there to put the numbers in front of you, and that there is an opportunity to get into the cannabis industry, and we can look at operating efficiently. We can look at creating alternative supply chains using biomaterials that solve multiple problems, cleaning the soil, conserving water, putting people to work, as well as creating products that are non-toxic and harmful. We are in the era of PFAS contamination. They're called forever chemicals. We have lead-coated lines. I am offended that marijuana gets cleaner water than city folks and some people in rural and southern Illinois. That offends me. And so understanding how we can create supply chains, products, and businesses that begin to reverse course in compromising our environment, creating products that compromise our health, creating jobs that compromise our employees' health by working for us. I would like to see us do something different. And with that, thank you all so much for your time, your attention, your energy. Reggie, Reese, you all are my day ones. Thank you for doing this. I deeply appreciate you. You can find them on LinkedIn. Celebrating HT23 is in some dispensaries, so make sure you follow them on all of their socials. And I will turn this back over to Asia.
Again, and thank you everybody for joining us for this conversation. I think the natural segue that this conversation has taken was really the way in which this industry is impacting Black and Brown businesses. And so first, let me say thank you to our panelists. David Lakeman and Tess from the Department of Agriculture, Reese Xavier and Reggie for our panelists, and a special thank you to Dr. Mila Marshall. She is really pivotal in the orchestration of this conversation and many more to come. I really would like to adopt that theme of hemp and really figuring out how to have a true conversation about what hemp can be outside of the controversies that are currently happening within the industry. I want to do a quick plug of our BIPOC Banking Summit. I just threw the link in the chat. We will be having a conversation really talking about the banking infrastructure in cannabis and how it does impact BIPOC-owned cannabis businesses, how to integrate BIPOC-owned financial institutions into this space, and what resources are available and what conversations need to be had, and how to, I think of all of the industries where cannabis is still has a heavy stigma, banking is the heaviest because it is not federally legalized. So we really want to engage in a conversation of resources for integrating banking into BIPOC-led institutions and how to create resources for BIPOC-owned businesses. So if you all want to participate, if you want to tune in, I put a link to our website giving more information about that conversation. And more to come with hemp, more to come with this type of programming. Thank you again, Mila. Thank you to everybody who has tuned in. And I hope to see you at our next event.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you all.
Thanks.